Blood protects blood. It is the oldest, most brutal law, and someone just broke it. The mob boss found his pregnant sister, the one person he was sworn to shield, covered in bruises mapping every blow. In that moment, the code of the street collided with a far more primal code. What he did next would expose his crime family's darkest secret and ignite a war between loyalty and vengeance. This is the story of a mob boss named Vincent Rossi, a man who lived by a code where family was the only sacred thing. But when that violence turned inward, targeting his own flesh and blood, he faced an impossible choice: uphold the mafia's law of silence or break every rule for a sister who could no longer speak for herself. Her pregnancy made the betrayal unforgivable, and the bruises were a message meant for him. What happens when the enforcer of a brutal code becomes its most vulnerable target? Vincent Rossi wasn't just any mob boss. He was the acting head of the Calabrian Ndrangheta network in Newark, a man who built his empire on two principles: ruthless profit and absolute family loyalty. The first was business. The second was religion. His sister Sophia was 7 years younger, the baby of the family, their mother's last gift before ovarian cancer took her. Vincent was 16 when he promised his dying mother he would protect Sophia. That promise became his cornerstone. Their world was one of silent dinners where business was discussed in codes, of lavish weddings in social halls owned through shell companies, of knowing that the family name carried both respect and fear. Vincent learned the rules early: omerta, silence, loyalty above all. Disrespect was answered with violence. Betrayal was answered with death. But there was an unwritten, sacred rule within these brutal codes: families were off limits. You didn't touch another man's wife, his children, his blood. It wasn't morality, it was practical. If you left someone's family open, yours was open too. Sophia was different. She had their mother's gentle eyes and a laugh that could cut through the tension in any room. Vincent made sure she was insulated, sent to a private college upstate, kept away from the darker operations. He wanted a different life for her, a clean one, and for a while it seemed possible. She became a teacher, 3rd grade. She loved her job. Vincent would visit her classroom, this feared man sitting awkwardly in a tiny chair, surrounded by construction paper and the smell of glue, just to see her in her element. She was his touchstone to a normal world. Then she met Carlo. Carlo Bianchi was from a connected family in Philly, but he was supposedly legitimate, a commercial real estate developer. He was charming, handsome, said all the right things. He approached Vincent formally, asked for permission to court his sister. It was old world, respectful. Vincent had his guys do a background check. Clean, mostly. A few minor associations, nothing direct. He gave his blessing. The wedding was at the Venetian, 300 guests. Carlo cried during his vows. Vincent allowed himself to hope. The first sign was small. 6 months after the wedding, Sophia showed up unannounced at Vincent's house in Livingston. It was a Tuesday night. She said she just needed some air. Carlo was working late. The house was quiet. She stayed for 2 hours, mostly silent, staring out at the pool. When Vincent asked if everything was okay, she gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she said. "Teaching is exhausting." He let it go. Then the isolation began. Sophia stopped calling her friends as much. She missed her book club meetings. She withdrew from the family Sunday dinners, always with an excuse from Carlo. She wasn't feeling well, they had plans, she was overwhelmed. When Vincent did see her, Carlo was always there, his hand resting on the small of her back, speaking for her. "Sophia's been under the weather. Sophia's thinking of taking a break from teaching." The control was subtle, a masterclass in erosion. Vincent's guys started hearing things. Whispers that Carlo's real estate deals weren't as clean as they seemed, that he was in deep to some sharks in Atlantic City, that his legitimate front was crumbling. Vincent confronted him man to man. Carlo was all smiles and assurances. "It's just market fluctuations, Vinny. You know how it is. Nothing I can't handle." He asked Vincent for a loan, a bridge to get him to the next closing. Vincent, thinking of his sister's stability, gave it to him, $250,000. No paper. That's when the climate in their house changed. The money didn't fix Carlo's problems, it disappeared. And Carlo's charming frustration turned to a quiet, simmering anger. The first time Vincent saw a bruise, it was on Sophia's upper arm, just a faint yellowing above her elbow. She wore a cardigan in July. She said she walked into a cabinet door. Vincent, whose business involved creating convincing stories, knew the shape of a finger grip when he saw one. He pulled Carlo into his study after dinner. The room was lined with leather-bound books no one ever read. "You lay a hand on my sister again," Vincent said, his voice low and flat, "and I will remove yours. Slowly, we clear." Carlo looked terrified, then indignant. "It was an accident, Vinny. I would never. She's clumsy, you know that." Vincent wanted to believe him. For Sophia's sake, he chose to. For a few months, it was better. Carlo was attentive, solicitous. Then Sophia got pregnant. She was overjoyed. Vincent was overjoyed for her. This was the new start, the blessing that would smooth everything over. Carlo seemed excited too at first. He bought a bigger house in Short Hills, another thing Vincent helped finance. But as Sophia's belly grew, Carlo's control tightened into a vice. He installed security cameras he said were for her safety. He monitored her phone. He quit his job to manage their investments, which meant he was home all day, watching. The calls from Sophia stopped completely. When Vincent called, Carlo answered. "She's resting. She's at the doctor. She's not up for visitors." Vincent showed up at the house unannounced one Tuesday afternoon. Carlo answered the door in sweatpants, looking surprised then annoyed. "Vinny, she's sleeping." "I'll wait," Vincent said, walking past him. The house was immaculate and cold. He found Sophia in the sunroom, wrapped in a blanket, staring at a gardening show on TV. She looked pale, thinner than she should be at 5 months pregnant. "Hey kid," Vincent said softly. She jumped, then forced a smile. "Vinny, hi." He sat with her, held her hand. It was cold. "You okay?" "I'm fine, just pregnant, tired, you know." He asked about the baby, the nursery. Her answers were vague, distant. Carlo lingered in the doorway, a silent sentinel. Before he left, Vincent cornered Carlo in the marble foyer. "She doesn't look fine. It's a difficult pregnancy, Vinny. The doctor says she needs rest. Stress is bad for the baby." Something in Carlo's tone was off. It was the smugness of a man who knows he holds all the cards. The baby was his ultimate shield. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in late October. Vincent was at a social club in the Ironbound, settling a dispute between two captains over a trucking route. His phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Something made him answer. It was Sophia's neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Agnello. Her voice was trembling. "Mr. Rossi, I'm sorry to bother you. It's about Sophia, I heard." Shouting, then a crash. "I called the house, no answer, I'm worried." Vincent didn't remember the drive to Short Hills. He broke every traffic law, his mind racing with terrible images. The new house was dark except for a light upstairs. Carlo's car was gone. Vincent used his key, the one Sophia had given him for emergencies, and let himself in. The silence was absolute and wrong. "Sophia," he called out, no answer. He took the stairs 2 at a time. He found her in the master bathroom, sitting on the floor, her back against the jacuzzi tub. She was wearing a nightgown. Her face was turned away from the door. The room smelled of cleaning spray, a chemical lemon scent trying to mask something metallic. "Soft," he said, "softer now." She turned her head slowly. The sight stole the air from his lungs. Her left eye was swollen shut, a grotesque plum color. A cut split her lip. But it was her arms, raised slightly as if to protect herself, that told the full story. They were a canvas of violence. Bruises in every stage of healing, deep purples, sickly yellows, angry reds, wrapped around her forearms, her biceps, finger-shaped marks on her upper arms. The distinct, terrible pattern of defensive wounds. She was 7 months pregnant. Vincent fell to his knees in front of her. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His hands hovered over her, wanting to touch, to comfort, but terrified of causing more pain. The protector rendered powerless. Her one good eye met his, filled with a shame so profound it was worse than the anger. He was angry about the money, she whispered, her voice raspy. "The money you gave him, it's gone, all of it," he said. "He said I needed to ask you for more. I said no." Vincent's world, built on codes and controlled violence, shattered into a single, white-hot point of fury. This wasn't a street beef. This wasn't business. This was his baby sister, carrying his niece or nephew, broken in a bathroom because a coward needed cash. He helped her up, wrapped her in a robe, guided her to the bed. He wanted to take her to a hospital. She refused, panic in her eyes. "No, no hospitals. They'll ask questions. Carlo will. It'll be worse." The code of silence, omerta, had been weaponized against her. Her fear was his fear. He stayed with her until the sun came up, cleaning her cuts with a tenderness he didn't know he possessed. He made her tea. He watched her finally fall into a fitful sleep. Then he walked downstairs into Carlo's empty study. He sat in Carlo's leather chair, looking at the family photos on the desk, photos of Carlo and Sofia smiling, a lie in a frame. The rage inside him was no longer hot. It was cold, dense, and precise. It had calculations. He could follow the old rules, arrange a sit-down with Carlo, demand restitution, issue a beating as punishment, but that would leave Sofia in that house with that man. The cycle would continue. The code would be satisfied, but his sister would not be safe. Or he could break every rule he'd ever lived by. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number labeled M. Colombo. Michael Colombo was a detective with the Essex County Prosecutor's Office Organized Crime Unit. They had a long, complicated history of mutual avoidance. Vincent had never dialed the number. His thumb hovered over the screen. Going outside the family, talking to law enforcement, was the ultimate betrayal. It was worse than death in his world. It would make him a pariah, a target. It would burn his life to the ground. But he looked back up the stairs, toward the room where his sister slept, bruised and carrying new life. He put the phone down, for now. Instead, he called his most trusted soldier, a man named Paulie who had been with him since they were kids stealing cigarettes. "Paulie, I need you to do something. I need you to find Carlo. Don't touch him, don't talk to him, just find him and watch him. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he sees." Then he made a second call to a private security firm that had no ties to his organization. "I need a safe house. Today, ultra secure, no questions." He was making plans, moving pieces on a board, but his mind was stuck on one brutal, simple image: his sister's arms. The violence wasn't random, it was targeted. The bruises on her arms meant she had raised them to shield her face, her belly. Carlo had been aiming for her stomach. The realization unlocked a different kind of fury, one that bypassed the rulebook entirely. Vincent Rossi was now operating in uncharted territory. The boss was about to become a vigilante. The protector was about to become a predator. And the first rule he was going to break was the one that said you always let the family handle family business. He walked to the hall closet, reached to the very back, and pulled out a small, heavy lockbox he kept there for emergencies. He keyed it open. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a pistol, a 9mm with no serial number, a ghost gun. He loaded it with slow, deliberate motions. The sound of the slide racking echoed in the silent, expensive house. Carlo Bianchi had just made the last mistake of his life, but Vincent wasn't going to make this quick. That was the old way. This required a new kind of message. He had found Carlo's secret ledger in the study desk, a record of his debts, his schemes, his betrayals. It named names, some of them within Vincent's own organization. Carlo hadn't just hurt Sofia. He had been skimming, lying, and planning to disappear, leaving his pregnant wife as a distraction. The ledger changed everything. This wasn't just domestic violence. This was a rat preparing to flee a sinking ship, willing to sacrifice Vincent's family to save his own skin. Vincent tucked the ledger into his jacket. The pistol went into the waistband at the small of his back. Paulie texted, "Found him. The Bada Bing Club Secaucus. He's with two guys, looks like a meeting." Vincent looked at the text, then back up the stairs. Sofia was still asleep. Her safety was now the only law. He had the where, he had the why. The ledger gave him the who else. All that was left was the how. And for that, Vincent Rossi was going to write his own brutal code. The boss walked out of his brother-in-law's house, got into his car, and turned toward the highway. The cliffhanger wasn't a question of if there would be violence. It was a question of how far a man would fall to protect the only thing that ever truly mattered to him, and who would be left standing in the bloody aftermath. The Bada Bing was a relic of the old strip, a low-slung building of dark glass and neon where deals were made in the shadow of grinding poles. Vincent parked a block away, the cold weight of the ghost gun against his spine. Paulie's text had been precise. Carlo was in the VIP lounge in the back with 2 associates. Vincent didn't rush. He moved with the grim purpose of a surgeon walking to an operation he knew would be bloody. He bypassed the bouncer with a nod, his face was his pass here, and stepped into the sensory assault of bass and colored lights. The air smelled of stale beer, cheap perfume, and desperation. He didn't look at the stage. His eyes scanned the room, finding Paulie leaning against the bar. Paulie gave a slight tilt of his head toward the curtained archway in the back. Vincent pushed through the heavy velvet curtain. The VIP lounge was quieter, just the thump of muffled bass through the walls. 3 men sat in a circular booth. Carlo, looking nervous, drumming his fingers on the table, and the 2 men with him made Vincent's blood run cold. They weren't Carlo's usual deadbeat associates. One was Salvatore Big Sal Mancini, a capo from the rival Genovese crew based out of Hoboken. The other was a man Vincent knew all too well, Marco Spinelli, his own consigliere, his right hand for the past 12 years. The betrayal, suddenly, had a face, and it was one he'd trusted with his life. All 3 men looked up. Carlo's face went ashen. Marco's showed a flicker of surprise, then settled into a careful, neutral mask. Big Sal just smiled, a predator amused by the new prey that wandered in. "Vinny," Marco said, standing smoothly, "we were just discussing a little joint venture with our friends here." Carlo was making introductions. Vincent didn't look at Marco. He kept his eyes locked on Carlo, who was shrinking into the booth's leather. "A joint venture," Vincent repeated, his voice flat. "Using my money, my sister's safety as collateral." Carlo stammered. "It's not what it looks like, Vinny. I was trying to fix things, get the money back for you. These guys, they have a line on some casino action in AC." "Shut up," Big Sal said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at Vincent. "Rossi, this is a private meeting. Your boy here came to us, said he had access to capital and needed partners. We were listening." Vincent finally turned to Marco. "And you were just here to facilitate." Marco spread his hands, the picture of reason. "I heard Carlo was shopping around. I came to assess the damage, see what he'd already spilled, to protect the family." The lie was so smooth, so professional. It was the same tone he'd used to advise Vincent on 100 deals. Vincent felt the ledger in his jacket pocket like a live coal. He knew now what it was. It wasn't just a record of Carlo's debts. It was a blueprint for a coup, payments to Big Sal's crew, notes on Vincent's shipping routes and collection schedules, and initials next to certain entries, MS Marco Spinelli. This wasn't a domestic dispute that spilled into business. This was a business betrayal that used his family as a blunt instrument. The cold fury in Vincent crystallized into something sharper, more focused. He had 2 problems in this room. Carlo, the immediate personal cancer, and Marco, the systemic, metastasizing one. He needed to deal with the first in a way that sent a message about the second. He walked to the booth, pulled out the ledger, and dropped it on the table with a slap that cut through the muffled music. Marco's eyes dropped to it, and for the first time, his mask slipped. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Carlo kept a diary," Vincent said, his voice conversational now, which was more terrifying than any shout. "Very detailed. Talks about money, talks about plans to skip town after one last score, talks about partners." He looked at Big Sal. "It mentions a shipment of electronics coming into Port Newark on the 23rd. My shipment. You planning a welcome party?" Big Sal's smile vanished. Vincent turned his full attention to Carlo. "You hit my sister. You aimed for her stomach, my nephew's stomach." Carlo found his voice, a desperate whine. "She was screaming at me. She wouldn't listen. I just wanted her to be quiet, to get you to give me the money. I never meant to." Vincent moved faster than any of them expected. He didn't pull the gun. He reached across the table, grabbed Carlo by his hair, and slammed his face down onto the polished wood. Once, twice. The crack of nasal cartilage was sickeningly loud. Carlo screamed, a wet, gurgling sound. Big Sal started to rise. Vincent's other hand came up, holding the 9mm now, pointed directly at Sal's forehead. "Sit. This is family business. You're a guest." Sal slowly lowered himself back into the booth. Marco hadn't moved, his eyes calculating. Vincent dragged Carlo, bleeding and whimpering, out of the booth and onto the floor. He put a knee in the center of his back, pinning him. He looked at Marco. "You said you were here to assess damage, to protect the family." He pressed the barrel of the gun against the base of Carlo's skull. "Assess this." The gunshot in the enclosed room was deafening, a short, sharp thunderclap. Carlo's body jerked once, then went still. Blood began to pool on the garish carpet. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant thump of music. Big Sal stared, his face pale. Marco looked at the body, then at Vincent, his expression unreadable. Vincent stood up, wiping a fleck of blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. He ejected the magazine from the pistol, cleared the chamber, and placed the gun on the table. He tossed the empty magazine onto Carlo's back. "A ghost gun," he said to no one in particular, "can't be traced." He looked at Big Sal. "The meeting is over. The joint venture is cancelled. You touch what's mine again, and I won't be this polite." He then turned to Marco. "You with me, we have to clean up." Marco stood, his movements stiff. He followed Vincent out through the curtain, past the oblivious dancers and patrons, into the cold night air. Paulie fell in step behind them, his face grim. They didn't speak until they were in Vincent's car, Paulie driving. Vincent sat in the back with Marco. "That was messy, Vinny," Marco said finally, his voice tight. "In a public place, with a witness from another family, they'll use that." "They saw a boss handle a rat who was stealing from him and conspiring with rivals," Vincent said, staring out the window. "They saw strength. They saw consequence." "And what did I see?" Marco asked, the question hanging between them. Vincent turned to look at him. "You tell me, you saw the ledger. You saw your initials next to payments to Big Sal. You were there to assess damage, Marco. Was the damage to Carlo, or was the damage to your plans?" The car was silent. Paulie's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Marco sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "It wasn't personal, Vinny. It was business. You've been distracted, soft. The family's profits are down. The Calabrians back home are asking questions." Carlo approached me. He had a plan to move the offshore accounts, to restructure. Big Sal had the muscle to enforce a transition if you became a problem. "A transition," Vincent repeated. "You were planning to have me killed." "Retired," Marco corrected softly. "It was just business." Vincent felt a hollow open up in his chest where his fury had been. This was worse than the violence. This was the cold calculus of the life he'd built. His best friend, his brother in all but blood, had put a price on his head because he wasn't making enough money. "What about Sophia?" Vincent asked, his voice barely audible. Marco looked away. Carlo was supposed to keep her quiet. The pregnancy, complicated things. He was unstable, a liability. I told him to leave her alone. Vincent almost laughed. The moral line for his consigliere wasn't beating a pregnant woman, but doing it badly enough to draw attention. Paulie pulled the car into the warehouse district, a desolate maze of corrugated steel and broken asphalt. This was where problems disappeared. "Get out," Vincent said. Marco looked at him, a question in his eyes. Was this another execution? Vincent opened his own door and stepped out. Marco followed. They stood in the yellow glow of a single security light. "I'm not going to kill you, Marco," Vincent said. "That's what you expect. That's the old code, eye for an eye." Marco waited, wary. "You're going to disappear," Vincent continued. "Tonight, you have accounts offshore, use them. You go back to Calabria. You tell the old men that I am not soft. You tell them I uncovered a traitor and a rat and handled them both. You tell them the Newark family is mine, and it is strong. And if you ever set foot in this country again, or if any harm comes to me or my sister from your direction, I will burn every bridge you've ever built. I will send every page of that ledger to the FBI and the Guardia di Finanza in Italy. You will die in a cage, and your name will be shit." Marco stared at him. This was a punishment worse than death. Exile, erasure, his power, his identity stripped away. "That's your mercy?" Marco asked, his voice thick. "No," Vincent said. "That's my new code. Now get out of my sight." He watched as Marco Spinelli, his consigliere, his betrayer, turned and walked into the shadows between two warehouses, swallowed by the night. He would never see him again. Back in the car, Vincent slumped into the seat. The adrenaline was draining, leaving a crushing fatigue. "You okay, boss?" Paulie asked. "No," Vincent said honestly, "but I will be the safe house." "All set, Sophia and the nurse are there. It's tight, no one knows." "Good, now we have another problem. The body at the Bing." Vincent nodded, and Big Sal, he won't let this stand. He saw weakness, even if he saw strength. He'll test us, and he'll use this as an excuse to move in. He was no longer just a brother avenging his sister. He was a boss who had just publicly executed a family member, exiled his second-in-command, and declared war on a rival crew. The walls were closing in from all sides. He pulled out his phone. The number for Detective Michael Colombo was still there. The ultimate taboo. Going to the law was the final, unforgivable sin. But as he looked at the photo on his lock screen, a picture of him and Sophia at her college graduation, both smiling, a lifetime ago, he realized the old rules had already burned. They had allowed this to happen. They had protected men like Marco and Carlo. They had trapped Sophia in silence. He didn't dial, not yet, but the line had been crossed in his mind. "Take me to the safe house, Paulie. I need to see my sister." He arrived at a modest, anonymous townhouse in a quiet suburb. The security was invisible but everywhere. Cameras, motion sensors, a direct panic line. Inside, a private nurse was checking Sophia's vitals. She looked up as Vincent entered, her one good eye widening. She was sitting on a couch, wrapped in a blanket. The bruises looked even uglier under the soft lamplight, but there was something else in her face now, not just pain, not just fear, a dawning, fragile realization. "Vinny," she whispered, "what did you do?" He knelt in front of her, taking her hands gently in his. "I fixed it," he said. "He's gone, he'll never hurt you again." She searched his face, and she saw the truth in his eyes, the violence, the finality. She didn't cry. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and the breath turned into a sob of relief so profound it shook her whole body. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, and he held her as she wept for everything she had lost and everything she had just been given back, her future. In that moment, Vincent knew every brutal choice had been worth it. But outside that safe, quiet room, the consequences of his choices were already spinning into motion. At the Bada Bing, the police had been called. A body with mob ties in a mob club meant detectives from the organized crime unit would be there before the blood was dry. Big Sal was on the phone to his own boss, spinning the story, painting Vincent as a volatile madman who killed his own in a public rage. And in a federal building downtown, an alert had been triggered. The name Vincent Rossi, dormant for months, was now active in a major violent crime database. The war wasn't coming, it had already begun, and Vincent Rossi, the protector, had just made himself the #1 target for every enemy he had, both in the underworld and in the world of law and order. His sister was safe for tonight, but the cost of her safety was a battle on two fronts that he might not be able to win. The crime scene tape at the Bada Bing was yellow neon against the pre-dawn gray. Inside, Essex County detectives moved with the weary precision of men who'd seen this scene 100 times. A body, a mob club, no witnesses. The story wrote itself, but the victim's identity sent a ripple through the room. Carlo Bianchi wasn't a soldier. He was family, married into the Rossi crew. This wasn't a hit. This was a message. Detective Michael Colombo stood over the body, his hands in the pockets of his trench coat. He was a broad man with a tired face that had seen every kind of betrayal. He'd been chasing Vincent Rossi for a decade, always one step behind, always blocked by walls of silence. This was different. This was a crack in the foundation. His partner, a younger detective named Ruiz, crouched by the booth. "Shell casings right here, 9mm, no prints on it, wiped clean." He pointed to the ledger on the table, still open in a plastic evidence bag. "This is the interesting part. It's a roadmap, debts, skimming operations, names, and look." He used a pen to point. "Initials, MS, that's Marco Spinelli, Rossi's consigliere." Colombo's eyes narrowed. A ledger left at a murder scene was either a colossal mistake or a deliberate plant. With Vincent Rossi, he leaned toward deliberate. Where Spinelli? Not at his home, not at any of his known spots. Cars gone, phones off, vanished. And Rossi? According to the bouncer, he was here. Came in, went to the back, left about 20 minutes before the 911 call, looked calm. Colombo stared at the blood pattern on the carpet. An execution, close range, personal. This wasn't business, this was passion, and passion made even the smartest men stupid. He had been waiting for Vincent Rossi to make a mistake. This might finally be it. But the mistake came with a gift. The ledger, names, dates, amounts. It was a prosecutor's dream if it was real, and if Rossi left it, it meant he was burning his own house down. The question was why. Across the river, the war had already begun. At 4 a.m., 2 of Vincent's collection trucks were firebombed in a lot in Elizabeth. The message was from Big Sal, your muscle is vulnerable. At 5:15, a known associate of Vincent's was pulled over on the turnpike with 3 kilos of cocaine in his trunk, a tip so precise it had to come from inside. The associate, a loyal soldier named Tommy, would never talk, but he was now in cuffs, and a key revenue stream was severed. Paulie delivered the news to Vincent in the safe house kitchen. Vincent listened, sipping black coffee, his face granite. He had changed out of his blood-specked clothes. He looked like what he was, a commander under siege. They're testing the fences, Paulie said, his voice low, seeing if we'll push back. We push back, Vincent said, but not where they expect. Hit Sal's sports book in Hoboken, the one he thinks is a secret, burn it, take nothing, just make it ash. Paulie nodded, and the cop, Colombo's been asking around about you all morning. He wants a sit-down. Vincent had known this was coming. The law was now the third front in his war. Set it up, neutral ground, a diner today. He walked back into the living room. Sophia was asleep on the couch, her breathing shallow. The nurse met his eyes and shook her head slightly. She took Vincent aside. Her blood pressure is too high. The stress, it's not good for the baby. She needs proper prenatal care. A hospital would be best. A hospital is a record, a paper trail. Carlo's body is barely cold. If they connect her to me right now, he didn't finish the sentence. The danger was obvious. Then at least let me bring in an obgyn I trust. Discreet, she needs monitoring. Vincent agreed. Another variable, another person who could talk. The web was getting impossibly tangled. The meeting with Colombo was at a roadside diner off Route 22, the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt tires. Vincent came alone. Colombo was already there, 2 cups in front of him. Vincent, Colombo said as Vincent slid into the booth. You look tired. It's been a long night. I'll bet the bada bing is a mess. Your brother-in-law is even more of a mess. Vincent said nothing. He took the coffee, didn't drink it. Hear what I know, Colombo continued. Carlo Bianchi was in debt up to his eyeballs. He was playing both sides, talking to the Genovese crew. He was beating your sister. And last night, you walked into that club and put a bullet in his brain. You left a ledger on the table like a confession note. What I don't know is why you'd hand me a case like this on a silver platter. Vincent met his gaze. Maybe I'm a public-spirited citizen. Colombo almost smiled. Try again. The ledger is real. Carlo was a rat. He was skimming. He was scheming with Sal Mancini to take over my operations. He was abusive to my sister. That's the story. A boss cleans house. That's not your jurisdiction, detective. That's mine. Except when it happens in my county and leaves a corpse, Colombo said. The DA is salivating. This could be the thing that finally puts you away. Murder 1. Premeditated, we have you at the scene. You have me visiting a club I part-own, that's all you have. No gun, no witnesses who will talk. The ledger proves Carlo's motives, not mine. Vincent leaned forward. But here's what you should really be thinking about, Colombo. That ledger also has transactions between Carlo and a detective in the Property Crimes Division. Payments for information. You have a dirty cop on your payroll. Maybe you want to chase me, or maybe you want to clean your own house. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Vincent had suspected Carlo had a source in the PD. The ledger had an entry that read DC 5K next to a date when a warehouse raid was mysteriously called off. He didn't know who DC was, but Columbo would. The detective's face darkened. He was silent for a long minute. "You're offering me a corrupt cop in exchange for looking the other way on a murder. I'm offering you a path of least resistance. Take down a bad cop and a dead rat, or waste years trying to pin a righteous kill on me, your choice." Columbo stared into his coffee. He hated this. He hated the calculus, the dealing, but Vincent was right. The case was circumstantial. The ledger was a bigger prize. "If I find out you're playing me." "You'll do what?" Vincent stood up, dropping a 20 on the table for the coffee he didn't drink. "Do your job, detective, and keep your people away from my sister." He walked out, leaving Columbo with the bitter taste of a compromise. But Vincent knew it was only a temporary ceasefire. He had just made an enemy of a principled man by forcing him to be pragmatic. Back at the safe house, a new crisis was waiting. The doctor had come and gone. Sophia was awake, her face etched with pain. "The baby's heart rate is elevated," the nurse told Vincent privately. "She's having contractions. They might be Braxton Hicks, false labor, but with her blood pressure, she needs to be in a hospital, Mr. Rossi, tonight, or we could lose them both." Vincent felt the walls physically close in. The hospital was a trap. Cameras, paperwork, questions, but it was the only way. As he was grappling with this, Paulie's phone buzzed. He listened, his face grim. "Boss, we have a problem, a big one, it's Marco." "What about him?" "He didn't go to Italy. He's at a hotel near the airport. And he's not alone. He's meeting with 2 suits, feds, and he has a lawyer with him." The betrayal went deeper than Vincent had imagined. Marco wasn't just fleeing. He was flipping, turning state's evidence. He had been the consigliere for 12 years. He knew everything, every murder, every money route, every buried body. If he talked, Vincent wasn't looking at a murder one charge for Carlo. He was looking at a RICO indictment that would bury him under the prison. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The personal war had just gone nuclear. Marco's knowledge was the death sentence for the entire organization. Vincent's mind raced. He couldn't get to Marco in a hotel surrounded by federal agents. A hit was impossible. He had to discredit him, undermine his testimony before it was given. He needed leverage. "The ledger," Vincent said suddenly. "Marco's initials are in it. He was part of Carlo's scheme. He's not a credible witness. He's a co-conspirator trying to save his own skin." "The feds won't care," Paulie said. "They'll cut him a deal. They want you." Vincent knew he was right. The only way out was to offer the feds something bigger, or someone bigger. He thought of Big Sal. The Genovese capo was a bigger fish in the New York family. If Vincent could deliver Sal on a platter, evidence of murders, racketeering, maybe he could trade up. But to do that, he'd need to get close to Sal, to record him, to set him up. It was a dangerous, desperate play. And he had to do it while his sister was going into premature labor. The two crises collided. Sophia let out a sharp cry from the living room. The nurse ran to her. "Her water broke," she called out. "We're out of time, we're going now." Vincent made the only decision he could. "Paulie, take them. Use the back entrance of St. Michael's. I have a contact in maternity. They'll be discreet. Use the name Ross. No paperwork until I say so." "Where are you going?" "To finish this." Vincent's voice was cold steel. "If Marco is talking to the feds, then the old rules are already dead. I'm going to give them a better story." While Paulie helped Sophia to a car, Vincent retreated to a back room with a secure laptop. He accessed an encrypted email account. He typed a message to a number he had never used, an intermediary he knew could reach the right ears in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The subject line was, "Regarding Salvatore Mancini and the murder of Carlo Bianchi." He attached scanned pages from a copy of the ledger he'd kept, pages showing Big Sal's direct involvement, not just with Carlo, but with a known heroin pipeline the feds had been trying to crack for years. He offered a detailed, sworn statement placing Sal at the scene of 2 unsolved murders. He offered to wear a wire. In return, he asked for two things: immunity for any charges related to the defense of his sister and witness protection for Sophia and her child. He did not ask for immunity for himself on other matters. He was sacrificing his empire, his freedom, and possibly his life for their safety. He hit send. The message vanished into the digital void. There was no going back. He had just become a federal informant. In the world he came from, there was no lower form of life. If this was discovered before the deal was sealed, he would be killed slowly by his own people. He drove to the hospital, a different kind of battlefield. He arrived as Sophia was being rushed into delivery. He stood outside the operating room, a lone figure in a sterile hallway, waiting. The nurse came out an hour later, her mask down. She looked exhausted. "It's a boy," she said. "He's small, he's in the NICU, but he's fighting. Sophia is stable, she's asking for you." Vincent saw her, pale and tiny in the hospital bed, a new life in an incubator down the hall. She took his hand. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Almost," he lied. "You're safe, he's safe, that's all that matters." As he said the words, his phone vibrated. A new email from the intermediary. The subject line, "Terms accepted, begin immediately." Attached were instructions, a time, a place, a hidden recorder. His first meeting with Big Sal was set for that night at a restaurant in Little Italy. He was to get Sal admitting to the murders on tape. The trap was set. Vincent Rossi kissed his sister's forehead, looked once more at his nephew through the glass, and walked out of the hospital. He was no longer a mob boss protecting his family. He was a pawn in a federal sting, walking into the lion's den to betray the only world he'd ever known. The protector had become the ultimate traitor, and the final, brutal act was about to begin. The restaurant in Little Italy was a fortress of old-world tradition, red sauce and redder wine, where the walls had ears and everyone knew the price of silence. Vincent arrived alone, the tiny recorder sewn into the lining of his jacket, a cold, hard secret against his ribs. Big Sal was already at his usual table in the back, flanked by two stone-faced soldiers. He didn't stand when Vincent approached. "Rossi," Sal said, gesturing to the empty chair. "I'm surprised you came. Figured you'd be planning my funeral." "I'm here to talk business," Vincent said, sitting. "The old business. You tried to take what's mine. We can go to war and a lot of young men will die, or we can settle it like adults." Sal chuckled, a low, wet sound. "Settle? You killed your own brother-in-law in my club. You made me look weak. How do you settle that?" "By making you money," Vincent said, leaning forward. He was playing a part now, the pragmatic boss, but every word was being captured on tape. "Carlos Ledger showed you're into the Genovese for $2 million. I have a way to clear that debt and double it. A shipment, pharmaceuticals, coming in through Port Newark next week. No customs flags, I need distribution. You have the channels." It was a complete fabrication, a story crafted by the federal agents, but it was bait Sal couldn't resist. His eyes glittered with greed, but also suspicion. "Why come to me after what happened?" "Because Marco's gone, my organization is in flux. I need a strong partner, and because the people behind this shipment, they're Russian, I don't trust them. I need someone who can handle them if they get out of line." Vincent was layering the story, adding just enough truth about his weakened state to make it believable. Sal studied him for a long minute. Then he waved a hand, and his two soldiers stepped back, giving them the illusion of privacy. "Talk." For the next 20 minutes, Vincent laid out the fictional shipment. Sal asked questions, probing for weaknesses. And then, as Vincent hoped, Sal's pride took over. He started boasting about how he'd handled problems in the past. "You remember that union guy, Donato, the one who was going to testify about the kickbacks?" Sal said, pouring more wine. "He had an accident, fell down the stairs at the Path station 3 times. He laughed at his own joke. "And that broad from the DA's office who was asking too many questions about the sports book, her car had brake failure. Very tragic." Each confession was a nail in his own coffin. Vincent nodded along, steering the conversation back to the Russians, getting Sal to agree to a meeting to finalize the deal. That meeting would be the takedown. As they stood to leave, Sal put a heavy hand on Vincent's shoulder. "You're making the smart move, Vinny. Family is important, but business is business. You can always get another sister. The casual cruelty of it sent a fresh wave of fury through Vincent, but he kept his face neutral. He shook Sal's hand, the gesture captured by agents watching from a van across the street. He walked out of the restaurant, the wire feeling like a brand. He had just sealed Sal's fate, and in doing so, had signed his own death warrant in the underworld. The news would spread fast. Vincent Rossi was a rat. The takedown happened 48 hours later at a waterfront warehouse arranged by the FBI. Big Sal and 5 of his top men arrived, expecting to meet Russian distributors. Instead, they were met by 24 federal agents in body armor, guns drawn. The arrest was swift, clinical. As Sal was being cuffed, he locked eyes with Vincent, who was standing off to the side with 2 agents. The look of pure, venomous hatred said everything. The word would be on the street before he even reached the holding cell. Vincent was taken into protective custody. He was not under arrest, the deal held, but he was now the most wanted man in the tri-state mob. His assets were frozen. His organization began to crumble as soldiers scrambled to save themselves, some flipping to the government, others being picked off by rival crews sensing blood in the water. He was granted one supervised visit with Sophia and the baby, who were already in a safe house under new identities. The baby, named Luca after their father, was gaining strength. Sophia looked tired but peaceful, the shadows in her eyes beginning to recede. "He's beautiful, Vinny," she said, holding the sleeping infant. "He is," Vincent said, his voice thick. He couldn't hold the baby. The agents said it was too risky, an emotional attachment that could complicate things. He could only look. "This is the only way, isn't it?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "It's the only way you get to live, you and Luca, that's all that matters. And you, what happens to you?" He didn't answer. The deal gave him no immunity for past crimes, only for the actions taken in defense of his sister. He was still facing multiple counts of racketeering, conspiracy, and likely murder for old, unsolved cases that Marco was now happily detailing for the prosecutors. His cooperation against Big Sal would earn him some leniency, but not freedom. He was looking at 25 years to life in a maximum security prison, where his status as a former boss and a rat would make him a walking target. He said goodbye, knowing it might be the last time he saw her. It was a clean break, the ultimate protection. The final surprise came not from the mob, but from the courtroom. At Vincent's sentencing hearing, the prosecutor, armed with Marco's testimony, laid out a devastating case. Vincent sat, impassive in his cheap suit, awaiting his fate. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for harsh sentences, listened to the litany of crimes. Then a letter was entered into evidence. It was from Sophia Rossi, now living under her new name. It spoke not of the crimes, but of the man. The brother who read her bedtime stories, who stood between her and their drunken father's rage when they were kids, who paid her college tuition with money he swore was from a lucky bet. It spoke of the day he found her, broken and pregnant, and how he chose her life over his own. It ended with a simple line: "He broke your laws to uphold a higher one. He saved 2 lives, mine and my son's." The judge read the letter in silence. She then looked at Vincent. "The court recognizes the unique circumstances of your cooperation. You have aided in the dismantling of a significant criminal enterprise. You have also, according to this letter, acted out of a protective instinct that, while misguided in its execution, is not without a moral foundation." She sentenced him to 15 years in a medium security facility with the possibility of parole in 10. It was a fraction of what he could have received. The courtroom buzzed. Vincent showed no emotion, but inside, a sliver of hope cracked open. He might live long enough to one day see his nephew grow up. He was sent to a prison in Pennsylvania, far from his old territories. He entered the system as a number, and he kept to himself. The news of his cooperation was known, and he faced threats, but the administration, discreetly prompted by the FBI, kept him segregated. He spent his days in the library, reading history books, and his nights wondering if the cost was worth it. Then, 5 years into his sentence, he received a visitor. It was Detective Michael Colombo, now retired. He sat across the plexiglass, picked up the phone. "You look like hell, Rossi. You try looking good in orange." A faint smile. "I'm not here on official business. I'm here to tell you something. Your sister, she's good. The kid is healthy. She got her teaching certificate again under her new name. They're safe, and they remember you." Vincent closed his eyes, the first real peace he'd felt in years. "Thank you." "There's more," Columbo said, leaning closer. "Marco Spinelli. He got his deal, went into witness protection. They put him in Arizona. Last month, he was found in his garage, engine running, hose from the exhaust, made to look like a suicide, but the autopsy showed blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Old habits die hard, I guess." Vincent absorbed this. The mob's long memory. Marco had talked, and the mob had collected. It was a reminder that the world he left behind was still there, and it never truly forgot. "He got what he deserved," Vincent said quietly. "Maybe, but it's over for you, Rossi. You did your time. You protected your family. That's more than most men in your line of work can say." Columbo stood up. "Stay out of trouble. Maybe you'll get that parole." He walked away, leaving Vincent with the echo of his words. The protector had become a traitor, then a prisoner, and now, perhaps, something close to redeemed. He had paid a brutal price, but he had delivered on his oldest promise. His sister was safe. His nephew would never know the world of silence and bruises. The final loop closed not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page in a prison library book. Vincent Rossi, the mob boss who broke all the rules for love, had finally found a code he could live with, the one that says some bonds are worth burning your world to save. As he looked out the barred window at a sliver of sky, he knew the war was over. He had lost his empire, his freedom, and his name. But in a quiet suburb, under a different name, a woman and her son lived without fear. And that was the only victory that ever really mattered. The story of blood protecting blood had reached its brutal, necessary end. The story of Vincent Rossi forces us to ask a difficult question: what is the true cost of protection? In the shadowy world he inhabited, built on omerta and vendetta, the ultimate sin was to break the code of silence. Yet, his most unforgivable act, becoming an informant, was also his most human. It was the moment the mob boss chose to be a brother first. This case rips open the hidden reality of domestic violence within organized crime, where the very codes that bind these families also silence their most vulnerable. For every Sophia, there are countless women trapped by a perverse notion of honor, where reporting abuse is seen as betrayal and seeking outside help is forbidden. Vincent's brutal revenge and his ultimate cooperation with law enforcement exposed the fatal flaw in this system. You cannot build a fortress of loyalty on a foundation of fear. His journey from enforcer to informant to inmate reveals a painful truth about justice. Sometimes it isn't blind. Sometimes it weighs the value of a saved life against the letter of the law. The judge who reduced his sentence recognized a moral calculus that exists in the gray space between right and wrong. Vincent Rossi did not find redemption in a prison cell. He had already found it the moment he decided his sister's life was worth more than his entire world. The Ndrangheta, the mafia, these organizations survive by convincing their members that the family and the family are the same thing. Vincent's story is the explosive proof that they are not. When the blood loyalty of kinship collided with the brutal loyalty of the organization, only one could survive. He chose blood, and in choosing, he dismantled the very myth that powers these criminal empires, that they protect their own. So where does this leave us? With a man paying for his crimes and a woman and child living free from fear. With a stark reminder that behind the headlines of mob hits and racketeering trials are human beings trapped in cycles of violence they did not create. Vincent Rossi's legacy is a complicated one, a trail of violence, a path of protection, and a warning. The strongest chains are not made of steel, but of silence, and sometimes breaking them requires breaking everything else. His story is one of many in the hidden annals of crime and consequence, a story of an impossible choice and the brutal, necessary path it carved. If you found this deep dive into the codes that bind and break us compelling, make sure to subscribe. We unravel another story of impossible loyalties and shattered silences every week. Thanks for watching.